Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Late and Cassette Podcast. And today I'll be covering A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Shortly after the success of the first Nightmare movie, New Line rushed a sequel into production. Wes Craven decided against returning because he had to sell the copyright to New Line to get the first one made, and he didn't want to work on something that he didn't own at that point. The script was written by David Chaskin, who worked in New Line's 16mm distribution department. Chaskin thought it would be fun if Freddy had a human avatar. Jack Shoulder, who made trailers for New Line, was selected as director. He also directed New Line's Alone in the Dark, which was released in 1982. Initially, they cast an extra as Freddy, as Robert Englund was asking for too much money. But after seeing some of the work the other actor did, Shoulder went to Bob Shaye and petitioned to get Robert back, and a deal was made and Robert Englund returned to the role of Freddy Krueger. Mark Patton was cast as the lead Jesse Walsh, the first male Scream Queen. More on that later. Brad Pitt and Christian Slater also read for the role of Jesse. Robert Russler was cast as Ron Grady. He said that on the last day of filming Weird Science was the day he auditioned for the role of Ron Grady, and Iron Man himself, Robert Downey Jr., gave him a ride to his audition for Nightmare 2. Kim Myers was cast as Lisa, Jesse's girlfriend. One of the producers stated that one of the reasons she was cast is because she looked like Meryl Streep. Sidney Walsh was cast as Carrie, a friend of Lisa's. Hope Lange, Clu Gulager, as Jesse's parents. Christine Clark, best known for her work as Carrie Brady on Days of Our Lives, as Jesse's little sister. And Marshall Bell as Coach Snyder. Kevin Yeager replaced David Miller as the makeup and effects coordinator, and Kevin wanted to give Freddy more of a male witch look, evident by his hook nose. One of the most talked about themes of this movie is the gayness or homoerotica themes of it. Most of the producers and effects guys and actors, and even the director himself, had no idea about the gay themes. But writer David Chaskin said it was supposed to be subtext, but all the choices that director Jack Shoulder made amplified it. Mark Patton said he doesn't believe Jesse was written as a gay character, but it happened by serendipity. Robert Englund said the movie is loved in Europe because they picked up on the psychosexual tones of the movie. That's a direct quote from him. Mark Patton left Hollywood shortly after because he was a closeted gay man and feared that his life would become hell if the media were to find out. He did come back to do some acting in 2015. Patton also lives with HIV and donates a lot of the money he makes from his appearances to various HIV/AIDS charities. They broke a lot of rules in this movie that Wes had established in the previous movie, specifically the pool party scene. More of that when we get to that point in the movie. I'll try and point them out as we go along here. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 was released November 1st, 1985, and it made $30 million against a $3 million budget. It made more than the first one the year prior, starting something of a trend for the franchise, where the next movie made more than the previous. We open on a bus driving down a street with the title screen and credits playing over top. When the door opens, we see Robert Englund without makeup in the role as the bus driver. The bus continues down the road, letting students off at various stops. We see our lead looking a little cold, clammy nerd type as some girls laugh at him. He tries to put a window down but can't because he sucks. The bus speeds past one of the girls' stops and drives into the Ohio desert. We see Freddy's glove shifting the gears and lightning flashes in the background. Finally, the bus comes to a stop and the ground around it sort of just melts away. And the bus is teetering on a small piece of ground above, I guess, what's supposed to be hell. We see Freddy get up from the driver's seat and approach the two girls in our lead. Freddy goes to slash them, and we cut to a family eating breakfast and hear a guy screaming. The little girl at the table asks, why can't Jesse wake up like everybody else? So I guess we can assume he's woke up like this before. It's a pretty interesting way to start. We see Jesse wake up in a sweat with boxes of shit all around him. He comes down for breakfast, and his dad tells him that he wants him to unpack his room that night. The little sister pulls Fu Man fingers out of a box of her Fu Manchu's cereal, and Jesse looks shook. Guess they're supposed to be reminiscent of Freddy's claws. And I don't know if you get away with a box of Fu Manchu cereals in today's day and age. I sincerely doubt it. The doorbell rings, and Lisa is here to ride to school with Jesse. We see the front of Springwood High, and it looks drastically different than the school we saw last movie. The school we saw last movie was in a bit of a hill, and it looked like a big school building. But this one looks kind of like it looks like a school as well, but definitely not as big. I don't know if maybe we can assume they swapped schools, in the 5 years in between. Because we do learn that 5 years has passed, so I don't know if they moved to a new building, but I just thought it was interesting that they didn't even try to keep any continuity with that. We see a gym class, and the boys are playing softball while the girls are practicing archery. Funny enough, and sort of the role reversal, Lisa's friend asks her if she's getting any yet. The batter gets a hit, and the ball smacks Jesse on the head as he is too busy watching the girls. I wonder why that would be, to pay attention to the game. The batter, who is Grady, ends up on second base and gets caught in a rundown between second and third. Jesse tags him out and taunts him by saying heads up play, because that's what Grady said to Jesse after he got smacked in the head with the ball. And Grady responds by pantsing Jesse, pulling his pants down. And pantsing was like an elementary, middle school thing when I was in school, so it's curious to see these high school kids doing it. Grady and Jesse then roll around in the dirt, and I guess they're supposed to be fighting, but this looks more like a mud wrestling match that the WWF would have put on in the late 90s. The coach makes them do push-ups as punishment. Funny visual of Coach Snyder smoking in his office. Grady tells Jesse while they are doing the push-ups that the coach gets his rocks off by making students doing this, and the coach hangs out around, and I quote, queer S&M joints downtown. It seems they bond a little while they are doing these push-ups, and after they are done, Jesse tells Grady that his dad bought a house on Elm Street. Grady tells Jesse the story of some chick going crazy there after watching her boyfriend get butchered across the street. Jesse tells him he's full of shit and walks away. We cut to that night, and it looks like Jesse is having trouble sleeping again. He goes downstairs to get a drink and thinks he sees someone outside. So naturally, just like our horror cliche from the previous movie, he goes out to investigate. He sees what we know is Freddy reaching into the boiler in the basement while it's on fucking fire, but he's all burned up, so he don't give a fuck. And pulling out what we know is the claws. Jesse goes back in his house and opens the basement door. He goes to close it, but someone is trying to pull it open. He goes to run away, and suddenly Freddy's in front of him. Freddy tells Jesse he needs him and throws him up against the wall. Freddy tells Jesse that Jesse has the body and Freddy has the brains before Freddy grabs his own scalp and rips the top part of his head off, revealing his brains, and this is a very cool effect. Jesse screams and wakes up. His parents rush in to check on him, and he tells them it was just a bad dream. We cut to science class the next day, and Jesse is dozing off while the teacher drones on and on about the stomach and the heart and some bullshit. A fucking snake appears on Jesse's shoulder, and it starts to wrap itself around him. Jesse screams and wakes up. His teacher tells him, if you want to play with animals, Mr. Walsh, join the circus. The class laugh at him, and Jesse appears to find it somewhat humorous himself as he flips Grady off with a smirk on his face. Or perhaps he was telling Grady that he literally wants to fuck him. I don't know. The teacher puts the snake back in what I assume was its proper place, and that's like sort of up front. So I don't know how Jesse or anyone would have been able to sneak over and get that snake and wrap it on Jesse. It's a bit of a stretch, but whatever. We cut to Lisa's house, and she's swimming in her in-ground pool, and she seems to be rich. Good for you, Jesse. She gets out and takes a call from Jesse, hard nipples and all. Jesse goes to leave, but his dad won't let him until he unpacks his room. Jesse puts on a tape and starts putting stuff away, very, very sloppily. This is the beginning of a strange dance scene that Mark Patton said was played in gay clubs all over the country. The scene is meant to be a ripoff from the scene of Risky Business. And Jack Shoulder, in the Never Sleep Again documentary, said that Mark was very, very uncomfortable doing this dance, but he did it nonetheless. His mom and Lisa walk in as he is using looks kind of like a pop gun as his crotch, and they walk in as soon as he's like masturbating it and pushes the trigger or whatever, and it comes popping out. And he gets embarrassed, rightly so. We see when she walks in, there's a sign on the door that reads, "No chicks allowed." Huh. And the crew didn't think this was out of the ordinary for a teenage boy to have a sign on his door. Well, that sign on his door? Huh. His mother leaves the two of them alone upstairs. Clearly, she has no fear anything will happen between the two of them. Lisa helps him clean his room, and when she puts clothes at the top of the closet, we see a board game called Probe. Wonder what that could be a reference to. Lisa finds a diary on the shelf, and they open it and see the name Nancy Thompson and the address 1428 Elm Street. Now, I never had any type of journal or diary or any of that bullshit, but why the fuck would you feel the need to put your address in it? I guess to return it, but you'd probably be pretty embarrassed, depending on what you wrote in there. If anyone, found it and read it. Lisa says the diary is 5 years old, so I guess we are to assume that this film takes place in 1989. Either that or the first one took place in 80 and this is 85. Something that's going to come to play more in the series is as TK was alluding to last week, the way time works in this series is very, very strange. So we are going to see more of that as we go here. The entries talk about Glenn and how Nancy gets wet for him. They eventually turn dark and she starts to write about her dreams of Freddy. A nice touch, actually, to have this diary in here, because it recaps Tina's death, and then Jesse remembers what Grady said about Nancy. I do think this is one of the better elements they put in here. It's not talked about a lot. They only reference it a few times, but I think it's good to see some basis, that they can point to for this shit happening before when it starts to go awry. Jesse awakens later that night and sees the helmet on his baseball lamp is melting away, and one of his records is melting as well, and he is sweating profusely. The plastic and shit melts, but nothing's wrong with him, he's just sweating. Whatever. He leaves his room and heads to the basement. He opens the boiler and finds the glove. Amazing that Nancy or her dad didn't pack that shit up when she moved out. Let's just leave the evidence of a vigilante murder and a murder weapon that was used to kill children. I'll never get over the fact that she took those claws. I know why she did, because to show Nancy, to prove to Nancy everything and all that type of shit, but I still think it's a weird choice. The boiler turns on and Freddy appears and tells Jesse to try it on, but Jesse refuses and throws it down. He falls, but when he looks back up, Freddy's gone. The next day at school, Lisa says maybe it's a premonition and asks if she can have the diary for a little while. We learn Lisa is having a pool party that coming weekend. Jesse and Grady talk shit about Coach Snyder in the locker room, and he overhears them and sends them out to do more push-ups. And it's amazing that it seems he can keep them for longer than the allotted time for class, and the other teachers don't seem to care. I, I've gotten punished in gym before where I had to run laps, or my gym teacher called it making rain, where you put your arms like, so they're parallel with your shoulders and you have your palms upside down and it makes you stand there. But that was only for gym class, and it never extended beyond. And it was never really long, maybe like 5-10 minutes, just enough to get you sore. Back at the Walsh's place, we see that there are two parakeets, and Jesse's mom throws a cover over them so they go to sleep or whatever. Jesse and his mom complain about how hot the house is. The dad says the thermostat reads 97 degrees. One more degree and we'd have a Nick Lachey and company. All you 90s people will get that reference. The bird cage starts shaking and one falls down dead. And in his infinite wisdom, Jesse opens the cage and the other takes off flying through the living room. In the documentary, we learn this bird is kind of a bird on a stick, and it sucked to work with, and they had it on wire and stuff, and it really did nick Clu Gulager whenever they were doing the flying around scene. They all said it was just an absolute fucking nightmare. And it flies all throughout the living room before exploding. Jesse's dad accuses him of using firecrackers or a cherry bomb to explode the bird. How? Nancy's parents were in denial of the last movie, and her mom was a bit of a fucking idiot about the hat. But this Jesse blowing up the bird bit that the dad claims happened is just as bad as the mom saying she had no idea where Nancy pulled that hat from the last movie. The parents in this universe are just fucking dumb. We cut to Jesse's room later that night, and there are 2 Coke cans sitting on his nightstand that have been sitting there the whole movie. So I guess it is safe to say that he is a fucking slob. And we see that the baseball helmet that melted before is perfectly fine and normal, unmelted. And that brings me to a point, is that it's so hard to tell in this movie what's a dream and what's really happening. This movie fails in establishing the dream world from the real world. It's a big flaw. Jesse goes downstairs, and it seems he looks cold as he's kind of like has his rubbing his hands on his arms a bit. We then see him walking in the rain, and he goes into a bar. He orders a drink, and the bartender, who is played by New Line head Bob Shea. In the documentary, Bob tells a funny story about going to purchase his S&M gear at the Pleasure Chest in LA, and he had his daughters with him. I don't know how old or young they were. They don't really say, but the way he makes it sound, they were pretty young. And the guy working the counter there threw the kids out, which I don't know why you would take your kids in a store like that anyway. I mean, adult stores around here, you're not even allowed to enter until you're 21, which is kind of weird because you should be allowed to at 18, but whatever. And Bob proves to be a shitty bartender by not checking for ID when Jesse asks for a beer. Furthermore, he doesn't say what kind of beer he wants, which it's not a big deal at all, but I find it funny that he doesn't at least make the name of some beer up. He just says, "I want a beer," and he gets him a beer. Jesse goes to take a drink, but is stopped by Coach Schneider. The coach takes him to the gym at school and makes him run laps. It's the night. The coach has no fucking right to make him run laps. And what the fuck is Jesse doing it for anyway? He must fear bigger consequences if he doesn't do it. But if I saw a teacher outside of school back when I was a teen, and they told me, "Hey, go do your fucking math homework and bring it to my..." No, fuck yourself. We're out of school. I really don't get what this whole... why he goes and run laps. The only thing I can figure is he fears worse retribution the next day. The coach pushes him into a stack of chairs and tells him to hit the shower, so this guy's abusive as fuck. He'd be fired in an instant. He's a walking, talking fucking lawsuit. While Jesse is in the shower, Coach gets a jump rope out of his equipment locker. I can only imagine what he intended to do with that. And while Coach is in his office, balls, yes, balls, start attacking him. Basketballs, tennis balls, footballs, all the fucking balls. Suddenly, the jump ropes tie themselves around his wrists and start dragging him into the shower. What, is Freddy suddenly a fucking ghost? He is a dream demon, not a fucking ghost. All the shower heads turn on, and Jesse watches as Coach is tied up, his clothes ripped off, and towels. Once again, yes, towels. Whip his bare ass. Smoke or steam fills the shower, and we see Freddy walking. This scene specifically is the one with the lumbering extra walking like Frankenstein's monster. You can tell it's not Robert Englund. Coach pleads with Freddy, but Freddy slashes his back, killing him anyway. Jesse looks at his hand and sees he has the glove on and lets out an extremely feminine scream. We hear a knock at Jesse's door, and it's the police bringing him home. They tell his parents they found him wandering around naked on the highway. His dad asks what he's taking and where he's getting it from, and Jesse swears to his parents he's not on drugs. We see the dad finally taking the bars off the windows the next morning. The mom says they should get Jesse professional help, and the dad says he just needs a kick in the rear end. Jesse and Lisa arrive at school and find that Coach Schneider was murdered the night before. We get another shot of Jesse in bed. You know, I know that this is a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but they show this fucker laying in bed a lot. Maybe I notice it more because we are only focusing on one kid as opposed to the whole group having nightmares about Freddy. But fuck, it gets old. He gets up and finds the glove in his desk drawer and hears Freddy saying, "Kill for me." He opens a door in his house and sees a little girl jumping rope and singing the 1-2 song, the first time we've heard it in this movie. The next morning at breakfast, Jesse asks his dad what all he knew about the house. His dad acknowledges he knew, they said something about some girl being crazy and a murder across the street and all that type of bullshit. The little girl gets scared, the little sister, and all of a sudden the toaster catches fire, but it wasn't even plugged in. Ooh. Jesse and Lisa take a ride later in the day, and she thinks it's all in Jesse's mind. They end up at an old power plant where Fred Krueger used to work. Lisa used the diary to do some research about Freddy. They walk in and explore. Lisa tells him the story of Freddy, being the child murderer and such, and she thinks Jesse might be able to have a psychic connection to the place, but he doesn't seem to feel anything. Back at his house, we get a POV shot of the boiler lighting up and someone walking up the stairs. They go into his little sister's room and we hear Freddy's voice telling her to wake up. We then see sweat-clad Jesse standing over her with the claws on. We then see him taking some stay awake pills or stay up pills. At school, Grady tells Carrie that he can't go to the party because he's grounded. Grady talks with his mouth full of food this whole scene, and it's so fucking annoying. Jesse argues with everyone and Grady storms off. I'm mad at Jesse. We cut to Lisa's pool party, and her parents head to bed. Lisa didn't want her parents to stay up all night because supervision, duh. Lisa follows Jesse into the pool house to try to talk to him. Jesse tells her he's afraid, and she vows not to let anything happen to him in what is, again, more of a role reversal of our slasher or societal norms. They kiss, and it starts to get hot and heavy. The kids at the party cheer when they see the parents' light go out in their bedroom, and they put louder music on, as if the parents can't fucking hear them, and they bring out the beer. And it's apparent the parents can hear them because the dad gets pretty annoyed by it, but Lisa's mother is like, don't worry about it, just go to bed. It seems Jesse is about to go down on Lisa when suddenly a long, warded tongue comes out of his mouth. Seriously, that thing has some infectious diseases. Jesse then gets up and leaves, refusing to talk to Lisa. He then goes and wakes Grady up. Jesse tells Grady that he thinks he killed Schneider and begs Grady to let him stay the night there. Another funny line, Jesse said something is trying to get inside my body, and Grady goes, yeah, she's female, and you want to sleep with me, so more of that innuendo. But Grady relents and agrees to let Jesse stay there, and Jesse tells Grady he wants Grady to watch him while he sleeps. Romantic, isn't it? And to wake him up if he starts acting funny. Jesse then utters the famous, don't fall asleep line. And I gotta say, Jesse is quite the fucking dickhead, refusing Lisa's help and going to wake up Grady so Jesse can get some sleep. What a fucking queen. Lisa leaves the party to go see Jesse, who is asleep on the chair in Grady's room, and Grady goes to sleep once Jesse's out. Jesse wakes up and says it's starting to happen, but he just looks constipated. Knives start to come out of its fingertips, and we see an eye in the back of Jesse's throat, which was a pretty cool little effect thing. Then Freddy comes bursting out of Jesse's chest. Grady's parents try to get the door open as he screams for them, but can't. Freddy then kills Grady. We see Freddy in the mirror, but when we cut back, we see Jesse with the glove. I think it should have been the end of Jesse here when Freddy burst out of him. And again, it appears this really happened, so I don't know how Jesse is still there if Freddy finally managed to get out. And did Grady think that it was Jesse killing him, or did he see Freddy? None of this is really clear. I no idea if it was part of the dream or not. But Jesse shows back up at Lisa's and tells her he killed Grady and Schneider. He tells her Freddy is doing this to him. Back to the pool party, it seems the water is bubbling and the hot dogs burst into flames. Lisa reads Jesse the last page of the diary and says Nancy wasn't crazy and that it all actually happened. All the doors and windows in Lisa's house lock, and Freddy appears and goes after Lisa. She is able to fight him off. She stabs Freddy, but to no avail. She pleads with Jesse to help, and Freddy runs out the French doors to the pool party. All the doors and windows unlock, and everything seems fine when suddenly Freddy bursts up through the fucking deck like a boss. He slashes some kids, and some fall into the pool, which has flames on the surface of the water. One of the kids tries to calm Freddy down by saying, nobody's gonna hurt you. Fucking hilarious. Freddy kills him naturally. Or Freddy naturally kills him, rather, I guess I should say. Then he says what may be the worst line of the series up until now. You're all my children now. What the fuck? Lisa's dad tries to shoot Freddy but misses, and she grabs her dad's arm to make sure he can't get a second shot off. Freddy walks through the fence and leaves. It is unclear if they are all seeing Freddy or Jesse, like I said before, but I guess we are to assume that it's Freddy. Lisa goes to the power plant again and sees dogs with human faces, and they look fucking awful. One of the makeup guys says he wasn't as focused on this movie as he was making Aliens at the time. Real professional, dickhead. Lisa searches the power plant for Freddy. She sees a mutant cat and rat. And finally Freddy appears and slashes at her, and she pleads with Jesse to come back. We hear his voice, Jesse's, and she tells Jesse she loves him. She tells Freddy she isn't afraid of him, and she continues to plead with Jesse to come back, as Freddy claims that Jesse is dead. She then plants a kiss on Freddy, and the whole place starts to catch fire, and Freddy melts. The fire goes out, and we see Jesse again. They share a hug, and then we cut to them riding the school bus. All of a sudden, after driving the whole movie, they're riding the bus. What the fuck? Carrie says that was a great party, and then Jesse freaks out a bit, thinking the bus is going too fast. He eventually calms down and apologizes. And suddenly, Freddy's hand comes through Carrie, and we hear Freddy's laugh as the bus speeds into the desert. Cue up the credits. So I guess we are to assume that they saw Freddy. But we only saw Freddy in the mirror, and it seemed that Jesse killed Grady, so... The positives, though, I like the Grady character, and having Nancy's diary is a nice touch, and I think the actors did a nice job. And I think this possession-type story could have worked if they would have kept more to the rules of the established in the first one. Rules are bound to get broken and changed and stuff, but this was more of it was more of a possession movie, which is not Freddy at all. And he's not killing any of the kids of... The premise is Freddy is trying to kill the kids of the parents that burned him alive. None of these kids' parents were involved, apparently. And Jesse's the new kid in town. The story of possession and essentially ignoring the rules is definitely a big negative. You can never tell when it's a dream and when it's real. And not enough Freddy. Freddy is barely in this fucking movie. We see him more than we hear him, and it's a big fail just on the fact that Freddy's barely in this fucking thing. But overall, this movie is just all over the fucking place. It would be a lot better if he terrorized the whole group instead of just the one kid. Especially the new kid whose parents weren't involved. Pretty much, this film just wanted to capitalize on the Elm Street name and Freddy while doing its own thing. Which would be fine if you tried to find a logical way to get there instead of just straight up ignoring everything set forth in the previous movie. Some rules can be broken, yes, but not all that shit. And that pool party scene is just atrocious. Having said all that, this is more of a thumbs in the middle for me than a thumbs down. A lot of bad stuff, but some redeemable. But that third act is a literal nightmare. The third act really is what destroys it. How will we fare next week when I look at Dream Warriors? Will we get back to nightmares and what the movie is actually supposed to be about, or more bullshit? You'll have to tune in next week and find out. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Late Cassette Podcast, and please follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And I will be back next week with A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.